I had been at the Halvorn dry dock for 6 years before anyone there learned my name, and even then, it was only because the tag on my coverall said Orlov, in letters too small for anyone to bother reading until they needed something fixed. I kept to the back row of bays, where the dead ships waited. That was the job, not the gleaming cruisers up front with their honor guards and their fresh paint, but the wrecks, the things too old, too broken, or too forgotten to be worth a real engineer's time. I didn't mind. A man my age, with my knees, was glad enough for quiet work and a roof. The ship they brought me to that morning was the biggest thing I had ever stood under. They called her the Koravash. 40 years in the yard, untouched since the war ended, because nobody alive could get her forward airlock open. I'd heard the stories the way you hear weather, something that happened to other people. 6 engineering crews, 3 admirals, a team from the capital with cutting lances that could slice through a moon and couldn't so much as scratch that seal. I walked the length of her hull before I touched a single panel, the way you'd walk around a horse before deciding whether to trust it near your hands. 40 years of weather had pitted the plating, but underneath the rust, I could still see the old lines. Clean, economical, built by people who'd had to build fast and build right the first time. Somebody had loved this ship once. You could tell by the welds. "You're the last name on the list," said the dockmaster, not unkindly, just tired. He had a tablet under one arm, and the look of a man who'd already written the report in his head. 6 crews, 3 admirals, the best diagnostic team in the capital. Nobody's so much as got a panel light to blink on her. After you, we scrap her for parts. 40 years, I said. Seems a waste to scrap something that survived 40 years, just because the door's stuck. He shrugged, the universal language of men who get paid the same whether the ship flies or doesn't. I looked up at that hull, pitted, scorched along one flank, beautiful in the way only something built to survive could be. And I felt something in my chest I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hope, exactly. More like recognition. "Give me the afternoon," I said. The official party showed up an hour in, because of course they did. Word travels fast in a shipyard when an old janitor-coated engineer is fool enough to try what 3 admirals couldn't. I didn't look up from my work. I had the access panel off, my torch dark, my hands deep in housing that hadn't seen daylight since before some of the watching officers were born. That's when I heard her voice, low even, the kind of voice that spent decades being obeyed. "You, what are you doing to my ship?" I glanced back. Admiral Vesa Kalarian. I knew the rank insignia even if I didn't know the face. Pale as winter ice, eyes the soft violet of a bruised sky, standing in a coat of deep naval blue with her hands folded behind her, like she was reviewing a parade. Behind her, a half-circle of officers in stiff formal wear, the kind who look at a man's coverall before they look at his face. "Fixing the latch, ma'am," I said. "Same as the others tried. I'm just trying it different." The others used plasma cutters and a team of 40. I noticed. I turned back to the housing. Sometimes a problem doesn't want 40 people. It wants the right one tool. I heard a few of the officers exchange looks behind her. I didn't blame them. I was an old man kneeling in shipyard grease, talking back to an admiral like she was my foreman. The latch mechanism, once I got past the corrosion and the war grime, wasn't complicated. It was old design, pre-war, the kind they don't build anymore because it's considered too simple to trust. A manual override, meant for exactly this. A ship gone dark, no power, nobody able to crack her open the modern way. The kind of thing only a man who'd trained on ships like this, 40 years and a lifetime ago, would even think to look for. I worked slow, the way you have to with old machinery, because it punishes you for rushing it. I cleared the grit out of the housing with a soft brush instead of solvent, because solvent eats the old gaskets and the modern crews probably hadn't known that. I found the access slot behind a faceplate nobody had thought to remove in 40 years, because the modern scanners were looking for circuits, and this ship predated half of them. None of it was clever. It was just the kind of patient, unglamorous work that doesn't photograph well. The work nobody bothers to teach anymore, because it's easier to just build a bigger cutting lance. I had a tool in my coat pocket I'd carried for longer than some of these officers had been alive. A bent steel crank, hand-shaped, worn smooth from use, the handle gone the color of an old chestnut from 40 years of my own grip. Nothing special to look at. I fitted it into the slot, felt it catch, and turned. The whole yard went quiet enough to hear the wind. The airlock groaned, that deep metal sound a ship makes when it remembers how to move. And then it opened, slow and complete, exactly the way it was built to 40 years before. Nobody clapped, they just stared, the way people stare at something they were told was impossible. I straightened up, wiped my hands on a rag, and that's when my sleeve caught on the housing edge and rode up past my wrist. I felt the silence change before I understood why. I looked down. There it was, the old mark on my forearm, faded blue-black, half covered by liver spots now. An insignia I hadn't shown anyone in decades. The mark of the 9th Recovery Wing. The salvage crews who went into dying hulls during the war to pull people out before the ships came apart around them. The Admiral's face changed. Slowly, like ice cracking. "That insignia," she said. Her voice wasn't commanding anymore. It was something else, smaller. "Old service, ma'am. Long retired." The 9th Recovery Wing pulled 4 survivors off this exact hull at Threll Pass. I was 11 years old. I was one of them. She stepped closer, and for the first time I saw past the rank to the person, pale, ageless, looking at me like she was seeing a ghost she'd given up hoping for. There was a man. He carried me out through a flooding corridor, with the lights gone and the hull groaning like it was dying around us. There was a hand on my collar, and a tool just like that one in his coat. I never learned his name. I asked every veterans registry that still existed after the records office burned. I'd half convinced myself I'd imagined him. "Orloff," I said quietly. "Mikhail Orloff, 9th Recovery, 2nd Platoon. We went into 11 hulls that winter. I don't remember all the names that came out of them anymore. I'm sorry for that." "You don't need to remember my name," she said. "I remembered yours for 40 years without ever knowing it. I just called you the man with the crank." That got the first real laugh out of me in longer than I could say, and a few of the younger officers, not understanding yet, laughed too, just because it seemed safe to. She didn't say anything for a long moment. Then she did something I did not expect from an admiral in front of her own officers. She came forward, took my grease-stained hand in both of hers, and bowed her head over it, the way you'd bow to someone owed a debt that could never properly be paid. Behind her, every officer in that half-circle straightened and saluted. Not the ship. Me. "There is a commission," she said, straightening, eyes wet now in that strange violet way. "Honorary rank, quarters in the officer's wing, a seat on my own staff if you'll have it. The least the fleet owes the man who carried me out." I looked at that ship, fully open now for the first time in 40 years, sunlight pouring into a hull that had waited all that time to breathe again. I looked at the crank still in my hand. I thought about the back row of bays, the quiet, the wrecks nobody else wanted, and the small, steady satisfaction of a job that asked nothing of me but my hands and my patience. "Admiral," I said, "I appreciate that. I do. A man could do worse than quarters in the officer's wing at my age. But I didn't come here today to be a hero again. I came to fix a latch, and there's nothing in me that wants the parades, the staff meetings, people standing when I walk into a room." I nodded toward the ship. "What I'd take, if you're offering, is the chance to finish what I started. There's scoring on her port flank needs looking at, if you've got the budget for an old man and his toolbox." She studied me a long moment, the kind of look that weighs a man honestly instead of through his rank or his record, and then, slowly, she smiled, the kind of smile that understood exactly what I was saying and didn't try to argue me out of it. "The budget," she said, "has never been better. And Mr. Orloff, nobody will stand when you walk in. I'll see to that myself." I went back to my bay that evening, the same way I always did. Coat collar up against the wind, tools heavy in my pocket, the dockmaster nodding at me like nothing had changed, which suited me fine. Nobody stopped me to shake my hand or ask for stories. But the next morning, somebody had moved my workbench from the back row up to the second bay, right behind the Corrivash, where the light was better. I didn't ask who. I didn't need to. I picked up my crank and got back to work.